friends, Jerry Rosa here at the Rosa String Works Workshop. This week's video is going to show you how I got the mandolin up to this point. I'm calling it done. It's finished. It's absolutely, I don't like to brag on my own stuff, but this is a beautiful mandolin. It is as good as it's going to get. I couldn't do any better than what I've done right here. So it's as good as I can do anyway. There's a little close-up of the rose again. Here's a close-up of the Peghead and the rose, the Rosa. And you can see the detail in the scroll there that goes around, and the detail in the scrolls up here that go around pretty darn far, and back here the same way. I've taken it out in the bright sunlight and looked and inspected it, and it's pretty good. I've been detailing it for a couple of days actually, and it's really about as good as it's going to get. So our next step, of course, is staining and varnishing, but that'll be in next week's film. Today we're going to talk about the binding and maybe putting the fretboard on, and I can't remember all the things I've done since the last video, but anyway, I hope you enjoy it. Thanks for watching. I'm getting ready to make the binding for the body. I have the same matching binding that I put on the fretboard, and of course this is full thickness, and then I've got the little laminate piece that we need to put on the bottom edge of it. The problem is this stuff is really curly. It's been curled up for years, and it's hard to get it to straighten out, and I would prefer it to be a little more relaxed before I start trying to bind these two together, or melt them together is really what it amounts to. So I've got a little setup here, and we're going to see what we can do about straightening these out. What I'm doing is I've just got my heat gun set up here, and I'm locking the trigger with a little clamp. I'm just going to go through it here like this and see if we can't relax it a little bit.
Brother John, he is a poor hard-working man. His life was hard, but he does the best he can. He prays to God just to thank him for his bread and a roof over his head. Brother John lost his wife when the fever came around. A gentle girl, oh, he laid her in the ground. She was his life, and her dying hit him hard till he heard the voice of God.
As I was making this binding video, I realized I hadn't gotten any footage of actually cutting the binding slot around the body of the mandolin. I use Stumac's tool here. As a matter of fact, you can see their logo on it right there. And what I did was I modified my tool. I made this piece on my metal lathe that threads up into here, and that gives me a longer deal that I can actually hold it against the body as I'm going around the top of the mandolin or the back of the mandolin. So I'm holding this against the sides. The cutter is obviously through here. But anyway, I used their tool, but I did modify their tool to make it work for me the way I like it to work. I also, and I probably do show this cutting the Peghead binding slots, but I use this which attaches to the bottom of the router, and I don't think it's going to be shown very well in the video, which I haven't got to yet, but I also modified it. Instead of having the round roller thing, I put this, and this lets me get the bit really close to this, and then that way on those slanted peg heads and things, your slot's a little more accurate. It's a little closer to reality. It's hard to explain it, but because that peg head is cut at an angle with that long roller bearing that they have in this, and it's not that long, it's actually pretty short, but this is much smaller and much thinner. This lets the blade get closer, and so therefore the angle's not as distorted. It's hard to explain that unless you do it, but anyway, the point is I did modify both tools. I got them both from Stumac years ago, and modified them to make them work for me.
Trouble on earth is ending, all your sorrow soon will be gone. You were a good man, you did all you could, and They're calling you home now, Brother John.
Well, I've got most all the binding slots routed out, and they're in pretty good shape, though they haven't been tested all the way around with binding yet. So there may be some more handwork needed in tight areas and things. I am going to put in these point protectors here, and I've already drawn a line across here where I think where it should go. And what I'm going to do, and I've got the line on both sides, and I'm just going to saw a series of notches in this down to my lines, just so you can see what I'm talking about. I've got lines drawn across here. There's a dent in there anyway, so we'll get rid of that. And then there's another line across there. And anyway, we'll just saw through this, and then we'll get rid of all this. Yeah, that's just roughed out, but we're getting close. Now I'm going to do the same thing on the other end here. I've got my pieces of, I guess you'd call them plastic here. They're kind of like a, I don't know, it's a man-made material type stuff. It's kind of like a countertop material. And anyway, very hard stuff. And I've got them glued on. And I've kind of roughed out a pencil mark about where I think the curve should go and follow the sides. And I've done that on all of them here. So I'm going to take my Dremel tool now and just contour it to match that pretty close. Well, I definitely recommend wearing all that when you do this kind of work. This is just, of course, roughed out, but it gives you an idea, you know, what it's going to look like. And when I say roughed out, it's probably a little bigger still than it needs to be. And when I put the binding on here, then I will scrape this by hand with a X-Acto blade or something like that to get it to the binding shape and size. But it's pretty close. It's just that it's going to need a little bit more work. Friends, I interrupt this video to show you this. Nice viewer sent me a gift. It's so cool to get a gift in the mail like that and not be expecting it, especially, I think. Here's what it is. It's a round bottom, it's a convex finger plane basically, but this one is a palm plane because you can push it with your palm, control it with your fingers. And it's adjustable on the length here. It comes from Lee Valley Tools. It's a very nice tool, and it came with the solid blade in it, but he also purchased a toothed blade for it as well. So Harry from Pennsylvania, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, Bechtelsville, Pennsylvania, but Harry, I really want to thank you, man. I appreciate it very much. This is for these arthritic hands that I'm getting, perhaps this will be a big saver. I think this will give me a lot more leverage and put a lot less strain on the actual fingers. So thank you very kindly, Harry. That's very nice of you. And here's my very first attempt at using it. Got a little piece of western cedar cut off here, and we'll see what happens. Oh, cuts like butter. Take me a little while to find the sweet spot on it, just because it takes you a little while to get used to your tool, but that's nice. Probably have to adjust it just a hair deeper. I thought I had it out pretty far, but the way this one's made is a little different than mine, the one that I'm used to. That's going to be nice. Boy, you can feel the difference in the pressure for sure. Oh wow, that's hugely different. So thank you very, very much, Harry. Let me see if I can. Yeah, I put it in a little deeper. Wow, that rips it off of there. That's awesome. That's really nice. Progress on the binding so far. I started here and went around this corner, down to this corner and back. And so you can see, and here's an example of how tight the corners are there. You can see that they match up pretty good, the lines and everything. And that's what I'm going for. I'm trying to get it real, I'm trying to make sure that the slot is cut deep enough. So I dry fit it in there and make sure that if I need to adjust the slot, I try to do that before I get it glued. I'm working on the tight scroll area now. The way I'm bending the plastic is I just take a heat gun like this, and I turn it on, and then I work it over this by hand until I get it where I want it. I used to do boiling it in water and all kinds of different options, but this seems to be the fastest, the quickest way for me is just use a heat gun. Now I will tell you, with this kind of binding, this stuff is extremely flammable, and I will demonstrate that here in a moment. In case anybody was doubting me in terms of how flammable this older style binding is with the acetate base, here's a little demonstration. Did you see how quick it caught on fire? I mean, I didn't have to hold it there for a minute. Watch this again. This is the plastic I scraped off the edge of the binding. So watch what happens. It's just instant flame and just gone. See, it just burns that quick. Used to be able to get picks made out of that same stuff, and the picks, of course, being thinner, and I think it was even a little bit harder. I think this stuff's got something in it that makes it a little bit softer, but those older picks, I guess some people call them celluloid, I think, but I call them an acetate based plastic is what I call. But anyway, you would touch a match to those older picks, and I promise you, I'm not exaggerating at all, it was like a magician trick. It would just go, it's gone. It didn't burn slow like that. It just went, it's just a flash, and it was gone. It would just disappear. And you would think, how could that do that? But it did. So could you imagine working in the factory where they made that? Oh my gosh. Whew, no wonder they charge so much for the hazmat, I guess. But it's all a gimmick. Somebody's putting that money in their pocket somewhere. Binding this scroll area is very tough. I've got the scroll bent as good as I can get it bent. On the back side and the bottom side here, I bevel it back a little bit. I don't know how well that'll show up, but I bevel it down a little bit because you're cramming it down in a corner, and I don't want nothing getting caught on that. You can't see it anyway, so that beveling helps get it back in that corner better. And just about ready to glue her into place. Maybe bevel it just a hair more even on that back far corner. And you can't see that, so it doesn't hurt anything. It just makes it go in there tighter, makes the top look much better when you do get it in there. So, and I'm using my Beacon 527 glue, which I get at Walmart. And, fairly liberal amount. You just want to make sure you got it covered pretty good. On this scroll, since this is such a big piece of binding, I just basically get around the scroll pretty good down to this first bend so that you can anchor it pretty good. And that looks like it's got good coverage. Alright, so we'll fit her into this tight corner first. The first thing you want to do is get this corner locked in. And so I'm going to, or this tight point locked in. And I'm going to lock it in with wedges because that's about the easiest way to do it. So that part's glued in pretty good. Now we want to going to anchor this curve here a little bit more. It's not as anchored as I'd like. And now what we'll do first is we'll go around here and we'll cut off a lot of the excess so that we don't have so much excess. And once again, you can always cut it again, but if you cut it too short, you're in a world of hurt. So what I'm going to do here now is try to figure out about where I want my bevel to start. There's a bunch of ways to cut these bevels. I cut them with chisels, I cut them with knives, I cut them with everything. And sometimes the easiest way is to cut them with this sander. But I will tell you, you can burn it really fast this way, so you got to be careful. Testing the water at the moment here. Don't really think I'm that close yet, but not too far off. I'm also testing my angle to see if my angle looks good. Okay, I can tell that my angle's getting a little steep, so I want to cut my angle back a little bit. I will say this is also another time where you want the sharpest X-Acto blade you got, so you don't want to be using a used X-Acto blade when you're cutting these things, because you want it to cut easy, because you're in a bind all the time and you want everything to go smooth on this. Well, I'm getting very close now. That's very close. Man, I hate to even have to touch it because it's so close, but it's not. It's still a hair big. So we've got to take it off just a little bit. Sometimes when I only have to do a little bit, I'll take the chisel like this. I'm pretty good with the chisel at this point. Still a hair long, I'd say. Hard to judge how long it is, but it goes away really fast when you cut it too short, I can tell you. I think that's it right there. That's it, I believe. When you're going to glue corners together, one of the key things is to melt the two plastics really good. So before I even start putting the glue anywhere else, I put the glue on the two ends because that'll soften them up, and they'll be softening up this whole time while I'm gluing up the rest of this. And then those two will mold together really good. When they're soft like that, they'll push, and then that way if you're a little bit long, you can push the length out of there. And that's kind of what we're doing here in this case. Seems to be mashing together pretty good. There's extra plastic kind of squeezing out of the joint, which is a good sign in this case. You can see there that the joint is pretty tight, and it looks good, and that's what you're going for. You want everything good and snug and tight, and I think we've done a nice job here on this. This area here is bulging just a teeny bit, so I'm going to wrap some cordage around this and let this set overnight. Okay, I had it taped up real good, but I thought, it doesn't hurt, just a little extra insurance to put some cordage in there. And so I just wrapped it with this little, I think this is seamstress tape is what it is, and I just have a big spool of it there that I just tied together in knots and just go around it. It's soft enough, it doesn't hurt the binding, yet it's tight enough that you can put some extra torque on it. And I'll let this set overnight now, and we'll get back to it in the morning. We still have this one little piece of binding to put in on the top, and then the top is finished. Well, it's overnight, and I got all the tape off and the binding, you know, the cordage I had wrapped around there, all that off, and it looks real good, nice and tight just everywhere. It was just a little bit of a gap right here, so I took a very fine X-Acto knife, got in there, cleaned that all out, re-glued that and pulled it in tighter, and that's real good now too, I think. I put this last final piece in here this morning, and you can see that I put a lot of extra curl in this right here, a little more than you would find on your average, and that just gives it a little more flair. And we'll do the same thing up here when we do this curl too. We'll make a little more flair there. And so now we're ready to start on the back. And so we're going to start rough bending the pieces for the back, and I'll show you how we do that. As is often the case, get a little bit ahead of myself. So I'm really not ready to bend the binding yet. I need to cut this little point in here so that we can make this come around real tight. And so you know, I've got it routed out with the router as close as I can, but then this last little bit of the point has to be cut out by hand with tools. In these places like this, you will always need to use just a tiny bit of filler. So, you know, you try to get it as tight as you can by the actual material. But, you know, realistically, you'll have to probably use just a little bit of filler in these tight places to make it look real good. It gets stained dark in these areas. You never see it. That's probably the main reason that you use all these dark stains on these mandolins, is because of all this kind of detail. You couldn't hardly make it perfect. I mean, you could, you know, but the hours involved would just be forever. So you do the best you can, and you try to split the difference between the looks and the time. See, what I'm trying to do is cut a point up into this area here. Very detailed cutting, and it just takes time and patience and a lot of effort. I'm going to bring you back when we get that part finished. I'm getting ready to bend this tight bend that goes around right here. And so we're going to do that one first. I've already beveled this piece of binding on the inside, and it's going to bend this direction. I've got the heat gun ready right here, and I'll demonstrate how I've been bending it. This also has an elevation to it, and it has to go down. So I try to bend that in there as I'm doing it. You can see that there's a little bend that way too, a twist to it. I'm actually trying to bend this outer thing, and I've got it bent way too tight, so it's easy to unbend it though. You just basically put it on here, and it will unbend itself pretty much. As the heat gets to it, it just kind of straightens out. Mark it a little extra long at first and just keep sneaking up on it. That's the best way to do it. I would like to get a little better bend right in here, and that's hard to do. It's a little flat right across there. Very hard to do right there. So I'm putting a little overbend in it, and then I'm going to let it relax. And I think I got it pretty close there. Yeah, that looks real good. Okay, now I'll cut it off a little closer to the right length. Still going to leave it a little proud though. And we're going to call that good for right now, because I'm just rough bending everything at the moment. I'm trying to actually overbend this because, once again, it's a very tight bend, and you know, we can always underbend it. I mean, it's easy to relax it with the heat, so getting it tight is the key.
that's all the pieces of binding, and hopefully we've got plenty of extra binding there if we have to remake a piece or something, but that should work out just fine. Got all this extra here.
My buddy is shaking tonight, Carmen's coming back home. Tonight there'll be no room for tears in my bedroom. Tonight Carmen's coming back home. Tonight as I stand here, I've noticed my hands here are trembling as never before. My feelings I can't hide, resistance is all that my bride will rush outside the moment she walks through the door. The lips that have kissed her, that's loved her and missed her, are lips that have cursed her at night. In anguish and torment I cursed as the nights went from darkness till dawn's golden light.
Well, as you might guess, this is probably the hardest piece to put in here, but it's not too bad. And I see a little bump right here on the edge. A lot of times these little, where you go around these sharp curves, the grain in the wood will cause the router bit to bump out a little bit. They're very small, but if you can take care of them ahead of time, that's the best thing to do. Okay, once again I'm going to wrap cordage around this. I could probably go ahead and fit up this piece here too, but maybe I will. I'll go ahead and try to fit that in there.
I've given much thought to the fact that I ought to have more control over my life.
I'm going to let this sit overnight, so I'm just going to wrap some cordage around it too, just to make it a little bit tighter.
The binding is basically finished on the body. Haven't done it on the Peghead yet, but you know, I probably could have cut the binding down a little bit more before I put it in here. It's standing proud about 1/16 of an inch all the way around, so all that has to be trimmed down. So that's what I'm doing. I've got all the binding level on both sides now, and now I'm going to take a single edge razor blade and go around and scrape it smooth to the surface. Anyway, that's what we do. We just keep doing that all over. I've got the top and the back binding leveled off pretty smooth, and I 45 that little corner. Now I'm going to go along the edges and basically do the very same thing. Get the edges smooth to the sides. They're pretty close already, so this shouldn't take too much, but again, it's scrape it. That'll be the rough part of it. We'll scrape it, and then we'll do a lot of sanding. Another tool I use to scrape the bindings, especially in tight places and curves and things, is I use this. And that's because it has the curved bottom on it. And a sharp blade does a good job scraping. And you can scrape right along that seam, and it kind of blends from the seam to the wood. We've got the binding pretty much leveled up all the way around. It's just rough leveled, I will say it. We haven't sanded or cleaned up anything really detailed yet, but it's smooth and, you know, to the touch. You can't really feel the seams or anything at this point. This is a jig I made that has the holes precisely that fits the Waverly tuning keys, and it gets my holes in the exact right spot. If the video turns out, you'll see how I got the holes drilled there in the Peghead. I test fitted the tuning keys and they fit perfectly, so I'm real happy with that. There's only a couple of major steps left. One would be to glue this on and glue on the fretboard. So that's, I just think of that as pretty much one step. But then the other step is that we have to route around here and put the binding all around this and do the detail work here. Now to do that, what I typically do, or what I've done in the past, is I use Simonoff's method of, have a hole in this and wrap leather. I wrap leather around the neck here and then clamp it in that hole and put this thing in the vise, and then it holds it like so. What I don't like for sure is if you're not real careful, you can mar the sides here real bad, and then you have to steam them out and clean them up and all that. You can mar the sides of the neck right here. So I thought there's got to be a better clamp system that I can make that'll work better than that. Well, I haven't tested it yet because it's brand new, but this is what I came up with. I took an old Sears Craftsman clamp here, welded it to just a piece of bar stock, and now I can put this in the vise, and this has got leather in it here. This is a piece of pipe that I welded to the bottom of the clamp here, and that's round. It just about fits the bottom of the neck real good, and that's a piece of leather that's in there. So I can hook it in like so, clamp it down, tighten that clamp down, and I'll put a block of wood in here too so that I'm not tightening down right on the neck, and that'll make it really solid. So here we go. That's real nice. I really like that. Now that gives me the peg head to work on here for routing out this binding and stuff, so it's real solid. Oh, there's a little give to it, but that's mostly in the bar stock here. I could stiffen that up a little more if I wanted to, but that's pretty good. That's probably as good or better than anything I've used. Plus, I don't think it's going to mar the finish on the neck here, so I think we're in real good shape. I like it a lot. I've got my router set the way I want it, and we're going to go ahead and route out the binding for the peg head. I've got the slots routed out, but there's a lot of places that you couldn't get to with the guide. So I've got to go inside of here and around this curl, and I've penciled in quite a curl there. I don't know if you can see it very well, but anyway, I'm going to try to cut all that out by hand using a downward spiral cutting bit and just freehanding it. So it's quite a job.
Softly playing, the music came so sweet and low. I heard my mother sweetly singing.
That's pretty good for freehanding it. I see a little bit here I need to work on.
She sang about the Rock of Ages.
Once again, I failed to turn the camera on. I'm going to have to fire the camera crew. I just basically used a heat gun to melt this plastic, or soften the plastic I should say, and then I just bent it by hand to fit these rough curves, and you can see that sort of fits it, but it's going to need a lot more work here. I don't think these slots are wide enough.
Where the family records used to be, I knew it was the same.
It's been a struggle getting these last two pieces to fit in here, and I think I've got them fitting, but they're very tight, which is good, but once I put the glue on there, I think they'll slide in much easier. They're not really sliding in very good right now. I believe I've got them just about right. If anything, this piece here might still just be a hair long, so I don't know. It's really hard to say, so I'm just going to go for it and see what happens.
matching up pretty well all over now.
When I heard someone
We'll let her set overnight. See how well that looks in the morning.
I've got the binding leveled up here on the peg head. There was a couple of pieces of binding up here that I wasn't real happy with the way they were on there, so I took them loose, put them back on again, and so while that's all drying up there, I'm detailing the body on the top here, and I'm using this X-Acto blade as a scraper. I have it really sharp. I even sharpened it additionally. What I'm really doing is I'm prepping the surface for final sanding. I'm going through, and anything that's not right, if there's any little scratches, I can take them out with this scraper. You know, there's a lot of detail here, and it's kind of like detailing a car. It just takes a long time to get into all the little nooks and crannies. And I have sanded the whole top pretty good with this 220. I then went with this 400 and sanded just this area right in here because this area is hard to sand once you get your fretboard on here. I'm going to go ahead and get the fretboard on. That's going to be my next step. But we've got it sanded down to 400 through here now, and I'm pretty happy with that. It looks good. Let's get this extension and get it in place with the fretboard and see what that looks like. It just changes the whole appearance, doesn't it? So what I'm going to do is carefully mark where I want this, and I'll show you that process. Before I glue the fretboard on, I like to make alignment pins. Now I know there's other methods to do this. You can use salt and put things on there, and when you glue it, it won't slide around, but that's not exactly my whole point. I really want to make sure I've got it aligned exactly where I want it before I put the glue on there. So what I do is I put real tiny nails down in here. I cut them off real short. To put the nails in here, these are really small nails. And before I do that, I'm going to take just a real fine drill bit. It's even smaller than the nails. And I'm just going to drill a little tiny pilot hole. Then that way it doesn't stress it so much when you drive the little nail in. And I'm just going to hold my hand under here so that it's not putting any pressure on the neck or the body joint. Okay, and so I just drive it down snug. Then I just take and lay these diagonal cutters on here, and I just lay them down flat on there and cut it off smooth. It leaves it protrude about, oh, I don't know, probably not even a 1/16 of an inch. So it's just sharp enough and protruding enough that it'll grab you, and you can't, you know, nothing's going to slide on that. Okay, so I do the same thing up here. It doesn't matter where you put these. I'll do the same thing up here in this general area, and I do it on the opposite side. Probably wouldn't have to drill the little hole, but to me it's just a little extra insurance about not stressing the wood. Okay, and just driving it in solid. It doesn't have to go very deep. Cut it off, and again, they both protrude just perfectly. What's nice about that is I can lay my fretboard on here and line it up with the 15th fret here, lined up with the plastic that goes across there. I can look at the edges of the neck, make sure I've got them where I want them, take a look down this way, and I'll even look from the back of the mandolin, making sure it looks like it's straight. Everything looks good. Looks real nice. Once I know I've got her lined up where I want her, then what I'll do is I'll take this other mallet and I'll go right,
And I've got a little piece of leather on here too. All I want to do is put a mark in the back of this. Then without letting it move, I'll hit it up here. Yes, it made a mark in both places, one there and one there. And now I should be able to set it back on here and find those marks. Yes, and it fell right in there. It's perfectly. Now, they're not quite deep enough yet. So what I'll do is just take and deepen those marks with a little tiny drill bit, a little bigger, about the size of the nail this time. And only just going to basically score it. I'm really not trying to go any depth at all. Now we should be able to put it on there again, and it should just find the holes it did, and now they're nice. And now I can squeeze it down tight and there won't be any air there. You know, I didn't want it to be held up in the air. So now it should squeeze down good and smooth. I believe it does that. Looks pretty good. Looks pretty good. And now I don't have to worry about it. When I glue it, it's there. It will not move. I can clamp it and it's perfect. You know, it just takes a little stress out of it. When you're trying to glue these things and get everything perfect, it's just hard to do. So this really takes a lot of the stress off of you when you do it this way. I'm not really ready to glue this on here yet. What I want to do is get this on first. And again, I'm doing this, you know, I'm doing it in a process here. There's steps that you want to take in a certain order. And what I wanted to do was get the fretboard locked in where I want it, and then put this piece in and make sure that it looks like the margins are right on it. And that looks good right there. I could use a super glue to glue this in real fast and easy, but I think I'm just going to go ahead and use my tight bond. And that looks good. I think that's just about perfect. I was just going to clamp this, but I don't feel as comfortable that way as I do just doing this. This is a temporary screw that will hold this in place. I spent quite a few hours detailing the mandolin and working on it and cleaning it up, and it's really starting to look nice, but you know, it's still going to take some more work. But I think I'm ready to go ahead and put the fingerboard on here, and then after this gets on, we're basically done with the mandolin, except for just detailing it, staining it, and varnishing it. So we're going to go ahead and get this on there and get it out of the way. Well, she's got the fretboard on her now. It's been 24 hours. The neck is a little bit big, proud of the fretboard, so now we're going to take that down.